Imagine you are standing right on the edge of a massive construction site. You know the kind I'm talking about. A billion-dollar infrastructure project.
Oh, yeah.
It's loud, right? You've got cranes swinging these huge steel beams overhead. The ground is literally shaking from pile drivers. And there are, I don't know, hundreds of workers in high-vis vests running
Boots
around.
everywhere, yeah.
It looks like absolute chaos to the naked eye. Just the sheer force of will trying to turn raw materials into a bridge or a skyscraper or whatever.
It's an environment of controlled chaos, for sure.
Make it.
Physically, I mean, it's entropy being wrestled into order.
Yeah.
But if you actually look past the concrete and the steel, there's a completely different kind of structure holding it all together.
Right.
A structure that is entirely invisible, but honestly, it's stronger than the rebar.
And that structure is made of paper, or, well, I guess PDFs these days.
Yes, it's made of words, and specifically very strict rules about who gets to use those words.
Which brings us to today. We are doing a deep dive into a document that honestly sounds incredibly boring on the surface. It's a source document titled Employer Requirement E3.7 Stakeholder Management.
It does sound completely dry. Employer Requirement E3.7. It sounds like something you just delete from your inbox without even reading.
Totally.
But this document is fascinating because it is essentially a blueprint for power dynamics.
Yeah.
It answers a very specific, very high-stakes question, which is, on a job site with thousands of people and millions of dollars on the line, who actually holds the megaphone?
Right. And the answer isn't just the guy with the loudest voice or the biggest bulldozer.
Not at all.
So let's set the stage for you listening at home. We have two main characters in this drama that we're unpacking today. We have the contractor, right? That's the builder, the one actually pouring the concrete and sweating in the sun. And then we have the engineer.
Right. And in this specific context, you have to remember the engineer is the representative of the client. The client is the one actually paying the bills. So maybe a government body or a massive private developer. The engineer is their eyes, their ears, and their voice on the ground. And this document, E3.7, it establishes a very, very rigid hierarchy between the two of them.
So it's definitely not a partnership of equals, is it?
Oh, far from it.
Yeah.
It's highly imbalanced by design.
Well, let's get right into what I'd call the golden rule of communication here. I'm looking at section 4.1 of the source text, which is all about communication with third parties. And there is a sentence here that basically sets the tone for the entire multi-year project.
The starting point clause.
Yeah, it says, starting point in performing activities is that, unless specifically stated otherwise, the engineer is responsible.
That is the absolute cornerstone of this whole thing. The default setting for reality on this project is that the engineer is the protagonist. The contractor is there to support. That is the specific word they use in the text. Support. The contractor supports contacts, they don't lead them.
So let's play this out because I want to make this real for you listening. Let's say I'm the contractor. I've just finished this technically impossible, super dangerous maneuver. I've lifted a massive truss into place over a highway. It looks amazing.
Total triumph.
Right. And a reporter from the local news shows up at the chain link fence, sticks a microphone in my face, and says, "Wow, that was incredible. Tell us how you did it."
And your instinct as the builder is to say, well, it was tough. We had to calculate the wind shear, and my team is just fantastic.
Exactly. I want the glory. I did the work.
But under E3.7, you cannot say a word. The document is incredibly explicit. It says all press contacts are dealt with by the engineer. If a reporter asks you a question, your job is to politely pass that question to the engineer.
Wow.
You are essentially a silence machine. You take the inquiry, you hand it up the chain, and the engineer alone decides how to answer, who answers, and what the story is.
That just feels so restrictive. I mean, you're the one doing the heavy lifting. Why can't you talk about it? Is the client just being a massive control freak?
It's not just ego. It's really about what they call project identity. When you have a massive infrastructure project, the narrative surrounding it is incredibly valuable and also incredibly fragile. The client wants to ensure there is a single source of truth.
A single source of truth? That sounds a little Orwellian, honestly.
It does, but it's standard corporate risk management.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. Imagine if you, the contractor, tell the reporter, yeah, we're crushing it, we'll be done 2 weeks early.
Sounds like a great soundbite.
It does, but what if the engineer knows that the overall budget is totally blown and they might actually have to halt construction next month? Now you have conflicting narratives in the press.
Ah, okay.
That's a PR disaster. It affects stock prices. It affects public trust, municipal funding. So they lock it down. The engineer controls the signal and the contractor controls the noise.
And it's not just talking to the press, right? It's even about the visual narrative. I saw a note in the text here about photographs.
Right, that's in section 4.1 again. If the contractor wants to publish anything like photos in a professional engineering journal, or even just to post on their own company website showing off the work, they have to align prior to publication and submit it for approval.
So even if I take a really cool artistic photo of my own crane lifting a beam just to put on my own LinkedIn to show my network what I'm up to, I have to ask the engineer for permission, like, Mother, may I post this?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Because even that single photo tells a story about the project. Maybe it shows a minor safety violation in the background that you didn't even notice, like a guy without a hard hat.
Oh, good point.
Or maybe it shows a specific proprietary technology the client isn't ready to reveal to competitors. Or maybe the site just looks messy on a day the client's PR team is trying to tell the public that everything is green and neat and tidy.
Wow.
The contractor does the work, but the engineer tells the story. That is the fundamental dynamic of E3.7.
Okay, so that handles the media and the PR strategy. I sort of get that. You don't want loose cannons on the evening news. But what about the people who actually live next to this massive construction site, the neighbors? Because if I'm living next to a pile driver, I don't care about the project identity. I care about my shaking windows.
And this is where the support role becomes even more interesting and, honestly, a bit trickier logistically for the guys on the ground. The document stipulates that the engineer leads communication with residents, municipalities, and local companies.
So if there's a town hall meeting in the local gymnasium,
The engineer runs it. The contractor assists only at request. They're essentially a prop. If the engineer needs technical backup to explain a vibration issue, they call the contractor up to the mic. Otherwise, the contractor sits in the back row.
the document even mentions official ceremonies and activities.
Oh, I loved that part. The ribbon-cutting protocol.
Right. The big golden shovels.
Strictly forbidden territory for the contractor. The text says official ceremonies are reserved to the engineer.
That's brutal.
The contractor probably polished the shovel. They probably built the actual wooden stage the mayor is standing on, but they are not in the photo unless explicitly invited. It's a very stark reminder that the glory, the public face of the success, belongs entirely to the client.
But there's a really tricky logistical point here, too, that I want to drill into because it affects the actual building process. The source text talks about turnaround time. Can you explain that?
Yes.
Because it sounds like bureaucratic speak, but it seems to have severe real-world consequences for the person trying to just build the bridge.
It's a huge deal for the project schedule. Think about it this way. Let's say the contractor needs to talk to a third party, maybe a local utility company or a farmer who owns the adjacent land, just to solve a basic technical problem. Like, we need to move this fence 10 feet, or we need to access this dirt road to get our concrete trucks in.
Right, just standard operational stuff. A 5-minute conversation. Hey, can we move the fence for 2 days? Thanks.
In a normal world, yes. But under these rules, the contractor cannot just pick up the phone and call that farmer. They have to loop in the engineer. The document says if communication is necessary, the contractor must take the required turnaround time into account in its planning.
So simply talking to someone is now a schedule item.
Exactly. You can't just say, I'll call them this afternoon and we'll dig the trench tomorrow. You have to account for the days it might take to get the engineer's approvals, formally set up the meeting, and actually get the engineer in the room.
Because there are absolutely no secret meetings allowed.
None. The document explicitly states that if the contractor organizes a meeting with a third party, it must be attuned with the engineer. And this is key. An authorized officer of the engineer must always attend.
It's literally like having a chaperone on a date. You can't just go out for coffee. Your mom has to come with you to make sure you don't say anything embarrassing.
That's a great analogy. And to ensure you don't accidentally promise something the client then has to pay for later, it's entirely about risk control. But it undeniably adds friction. It turns a quick chat over the fence into a formal process activity.
Right.
And if the engineer is busy or on vacation or just slow to respond, your excavator's just sitting there idling, burning fuel, costing you thousands of dollars a day because you aren't allowed to talk to the farmer without supervision.
That feels like a massive catch-22. If you fall behind schedule, you get fined by the client. But if you try to speed things up by talking to people directly to solve problems, you get in trouble for breaching the stakeholder contract.
That is the central tension of modern construction management right there. The client prioritizes absolute control over speed. They would rather the project be slightly delayed than have a contractor making unchecked promises.
Okay, so we've established that the engineer is the control freak here. or let's be charitable, the guardian of the narrative. But surely there has to be a moment where the contractor actually takes charge. You can't run a highly dangerous construction site by committee, right? If something catches on fire, you weren't scheduling a Zoom meeting to discuss the project identity of the smoke.
You've hit on the crucial exception in the text, and the document is very clear on this shift. There is one specific area where the contractor is king, and that is emergency services.
This is in section 4.1 as well, right?
Yes. It says communication with emergency services is always the duty and responsibility of the contractor.
Which makes total sense. If the scaffolding collapses or there's a massive gas leak, you are not going to email the engineer and wait 2 days for approval to call 911.
Precisely. The logic of brain control goes completely out the window when lives are at risk. In a crisis, speed is the only thing that matters. So the contractor has full authority to coordinate directly with fire, ambulance, and police. The bureaucracy evaporates the second there's actual danger.
And it seems like that extends to what I'd call operational necessity, too. Like not just emergencies, but the intense technical stuff that keeps the world moving safely around the site.
Correct. The document lists things like hospitals, road authorities, shipping, and transport sectors. The contractor is directly responsible for aligning with them regarding accessibility and functionality.
There was a specific mention of nautical and harbor authorities that I found really interesting.
It is specific, but think about where a project like this might be. If you're building a massive suspension bridge over a bay, you're affecting international shipping lanes. You have massive container ships passing by your construction barges every day.
Oh, true.
The document says the contractor must establish a communication plan specifically for the harbor authority and ensure the deployment of pilotage.
Pilotage.
Yeah, the maritime term. It means bringing in specialist local pilots to physically guide ships through tricky waters. In this case, navigating them safely through the active construction zone.
Gotcha.
The engineer doesn't want to manage that. That's pure logistics. That's technical and operational risk.
Yeah.
So the distinction really crystallizes here. The contractor handles the logistics of the physical world around them, making sure ships don't crash and ambulances can get through.
Right.
While the engineer handles the politics, how the world feels about the project.
That's a fantastic way to put it. Logistics versus politics. The contractor moves the atoms, the engineer moves the opinions.
Exactly. And honestly, nowhere is that clearer than in how they handle public complaints.
Oh, man. Section 4.2. Handling complaints. This was my favorite part of the whole document because it feels so painfully corporate. It's an absolute masterclass in bureaucratic workflow.
It really is. Let's walk through the complaint life cycle.
Okay, so let's say I'm that angry neighbor again. Mrs. Johnson. My windows are rattling because you guys are drilling at 7 a.m. I call the project hotline. The contractor picks up, or maybe I just yell at a guy in a hard hat over the fence. The contractor now has a literal process activity on their hands.
Right. They can't just ignore you. They have to keep a very specific register of these complaints.
And the clock immediately starts ticking. The document says the contractor must notify the engineer as soon as possible, but within 2 days.
2 days. That's the hard window to report the incident up the chain.
And in that notification, the contractor has to explicitly state what they're going to do to fix it. Like, we'll stop drilling at night, or we'll build a temporary sound barrier, and they have to estimate the turnaround time for that solution. So the contractor does the actual physical work to fix the problem.
Correct. The contractor solves the issue, they sweat, they spend the money, they change their operational schedule.
But then, here's the twist that drove me crazy reading this. Who actually calls Mrs. Johnson back?
The document says the engineer is responsible for providing feedback towards the third party.
The engineer. So the contractor sweats to fix the noisy generator, physically installs the sound dampeners, does all the heavy lifting and spends the money. And then the engineer picks up the phone in a quiet office and says, "Good news, Mrs. Johnson. We've taken care of that for you."
It creates a very specific dynamic.
Yep.
To the outside world, to Mrs. Johnson, the engineer is the hero of the story.
Yeah.
The engineer is the responsive, caring one who listens and gets things done. The contractor is just the invisible hand that cleans up the mess.
It effectively insulates the client from any of the blame while allowing them to take 100% of the credit for the solution.
That is the cynical view, yes.
Yeah.
And it's probably accurate. But there is a more charitable view, too, if we're being fair.
Which is what?
It ensures the message to Mrs. Johnson is polite, professional, and consistent.
Oh.
Let's be honest, the site foreman who has been sweating over a broken jackhammer all day might not be the most diplomatic person to handle a delicate community relations call.
That's a fair point.
He might just pick up the phone and say, yeah, we stopped. Now let us get back to work.
Yeah, true. Diplomacy isn't exactly a required skill for pouring concrete.
So the engineer essentially acts as a politeness filter. They take the raw, practical solution from the contractor, wrap it in nice PR language, and deliver it to the stakeholder. It keeps the peace.
But there is a huge risk there too, isn't there? If the engineer is the only one authorized to give feedback, they become the bottleneck. If the contractor fixes the noise on Tuesday, but the engineer forgets to call Mrs. Johnson until Friday, Mrs. Johnson is still angry at the project for 3 days.
Exactly. The entire system relies heavily on the engineer being competent, organized, and fast.
Right. Now, speaking of filters and control, let's talk about visuals again, specifically signs. Section 4.3, placing advertisements and building signs. This felt like the ultimate physical metaphor for the whole document.
It really is, the building signs. You know the ones, the massive wooden billboards on the edge of the site showing the beautiful 3D rendering of the finished project with the fake blue sky and the happy CGI people walking around?
Oh yeah, totally. So under E3.7, who manufactures that physical sign?
The contractor. They build the heavy wooden frame, they print the giant vinyl graphic, they pour the concrete footings for the posts.
And who actually puts it up?
The contractor.
Who cleans it?
The contractor. The document is explicit about this. Maintenance and cleaning is entirely on the contractor. So if local kids spray painted overnight, the contractor is out there the next morning scribbing it off.
And who decides what is actually written on it and where it goes on the site?
The engineer. The text says location and text are determined by the engineer.
There it is. The contractor builds the platform, the engineer provides the message. It's total visual dominance. The contractor is the labor, the engineer is the brain.
And get this, when the job is finally done, the contractor has to remove those signs within 4 weeks of ending the works at that location.
Wow.
Even the cleanup is on them. You have to physically clean up the party that you weren't really invited to speak at.
And strictly no advertisements, right? Like,
No.
the contractor cannot put up a giant banner saying, built by Smith & Company, without written permission.
Exactly. The site is not a billboard for the builder. It's a stage for the client.
So we have all these strict rules for meetings, complaints, signs, photos. It implies a massive amount of tracking. How do they actually enforce this on a site with 1,000 people? Because if I'm the contractor, I might be tempted to just have a quick chat with a neighbor to solve a problem and just not tell the engineer. Who's going to know?
That brings us to the paper trail. Section 6.1, the Register of Contact Moments.
This sounded like homework to me, but like incredibly intense homework.
It is homework, but it's high-stakes homework. This isn't just a friendly diary of the day. It's explicitly listed as a product requirement.
So what actually goes into this register?
Everything. It's literal data entry for human interaction. Section 6.1 lists the mandatory fields, organization name, address, contact persons. But then for every single moment of contact, whether it's a quick phone call, a formal meeting, or even an email, they have to log the specifics.
Like what?
Who was there from all sides? What was the goal of the contact? What was the form of contact? Where did it happen? And exactly what time?
And the outcome of the chat?
Yeah. Discuss topics, the resulting action list, and the formal minutes of the meeting.
So if I just bump into a local stakeholder at the grocery store on a Sunday and we casually talk about the project's progress, technically,
If it's a relevant stakeholder contact moment and you don't officially log it, you are in breach of your multi-million-dollar contract.
that is wild.
And notice the requirement about the format, too. It says registration must be done in a format to be provided by the engineer or in an automated system.
So you can't just scribble it in a notebook and hand it over. You have to input it into their proprietary software system.
Right. It takes human relationships and turns them into auditable data. And this register is a mandatory part of the monthly progress report. So right alongside the engineering report on how many tons of concrete were poured and how many steel beams were welded, there's a detailed data report on who said what to whom.
Why go to this extreme level of detail? It feels obsessive. It feels very Big Brother.
It's all about long-term liability and institutional memory. Construction projects of this scale can take 5, maybe 10 years to finish.
Sure.
People leave. Project managers change jobs. Companies get bought out. If 3 years from now, a local landowner sues and claims, hey, that guy in the yellow vest promised me 3 years ago that you'd rebuild my brick wall, the engineer can just look at the database.
And if that conversation isn't in the register,
Then, legally, it didn't happen. It heavily defends the client against he said, she said scenarios.
so it's essentially a giant legal shield.
It is a shield for the client, but Honestly, it protects the contractor, too, if they use it right. If the contractor logged the complaint and the action they took to fix it, they have rock-solid proof they did their job. It turns a fuzzy human memory into a legal, verifiable fact.
So, stepping back from the granular specifics of E3.7 for a second, we have a document here that essentially strips the contractor of their public voice entirely. They can't talk to the press, they can't talk to neighbors without a chaperone, they can't post photos of their own work, and they have to log every single conversation into a government or corporate database.
Yes, and yet they still carry all the massive physical responsibility for the safety, the execution, and the logistics of the build.
What does this actually tell us about modern construction, or really just modern business at scale?
I think it tells us that information flow is now considered just as dangerous and just as critical to manage as physical traffic flow or high-voltage electricity.
Huh.
On a project of this massive scale, a loose comment to a journalist or a misunderstood promise to a local neighbor can cause legal delays that cost millions and millions of dollars.
So the strictness isn't just about some client being a control freak. It's a calculated risk mitigation strategy.
It absolutely is, but it comes at a huge operational cost. And that's the real tension here. By centralizing all communication through the engineer, you inherently create a massive choke point.
Right. The bottleneck we talked about?
If the engineer is slow to approve a photo or slow to attend a crucial meeting, the physical progress of the whole project can drag. The document demands the engineer be everywhere, in every meeting, approving every single sign.
Which requires a lot of manpower.
Exactly. That requires a highly efficient, well-staffed engineer. If they aren't incredibly efficient, this desire for control becomes an anchor that drags the whole project down.
It forces the contractor to move at the speed of the engineer's bureaucracy rather than the speed of their own machinery.
Exactly. The document fundamentally prioritizes control over speed. Except, of course, when there's a literal fire. Then, and only then, does speed actually win.
It's just so fascinating how a highly technical document about stakeholder management is really, deep down, a document about who owns reality on the job site. The contractor builds the physical reality, but the engineer builds the perception of that reality.
And in the long run, especially for public works, the perception is often what determines if a project is ultimately considered a success.
Right.
You can build a technically perfect, beautiful bridge, but if the local community hates you and the press thinks you're incompetent because of mixed messaging early on, the project is deemed a failure. E3.7 is engineered specifically to prevent that kind of failure.
That makes a lot of sense. So for you listening, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've seen how this intense, centralized control by the engineer is designed to prevent PR disasters and manage risk. But does requiring the engineer to be in every meeting and approve every photo actually prevent disasters? Or does this level of micromanagement just create a bureaucratic bottleneck that fundamentally slows down our ability to build big things in the modern world?
It's the multi-billion-dollar question.
It really is. Well, next time you drive past a massive construction site and you see one of those big, pristine signs saying, "Sorry for the inconvenience, I bet you're going to think about it differently." You can picture the contractor out there scrubbing the dirt off of it while the engineer sits in a clean office somewhere, nodding approvingly at the font choice.
And remember, if you call the hotline number printed on that sign, the person fixing your problem and the person politely calling you back might be working for two completely different companies with two completely different agendas.
The invisible hands and the highly visible voices. That is the hidden world of E3.7. Thanks for doing this deep dive with us today into the secret rules of construction.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next one.
If you're interested in the templates, please visit our shop. The link is in the description.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see next time.